Hello, welcome to Water 101, brought to you by Manitowoc Public Utilities. What do you know about your H2O? I like to start by showing a map from the 1800s of the city of Manitowoc. It's always interesting to think where these residents received their drinking water from, whether it was from some shallow cisterns or groundwater wells, or even some rivers and streams. The MPU Water utility was formed in 1911. The city was served by groundwater wells throughout the city. One of the primary wells was on Columbus Street, near where the power plant stands today. In 1925, there was news of a rampant city sickness, and it was attributed to lake water that may have gotten into these groundwater wells. That's an interesting point to remember as we move on through this slideshow, because people were very nervous about switching to lake water in the future. Throughout the 1930s and 40s, well water was supplemented by chlorinated lake water. Chlorine was used to disinfect the water to supplement the groundwater. And in 1938, the original water treatment plant was constructed. Here in this picture, we have the standpipe that was constructed in the early 1900s, and that standpipe would hold water for firefighting purposes. That standpipe was situated where Tower Tavern stands today, and that's likely why they call it the Tower Tavern. This picture in the lower left shows our reservoir and our pump station on Columbus Street in the early 1900s. Here's a news article from 1943 where even the city and the organized labor was opposed to drinking Lake Michigan water. They thought that their groundwater was pristine and it would serve the city for years to come, and they would never drink Lake Michigan water. With the strong opposition of using Lake Michigan water for drinking water, the utility continued to install groundwater wells throughout the city. These were called collector wells, and they installed two wells in the 1940s, and Collector C was constructed in 1959. In the 1960s, even though we were getting groundwater from these wells, the low Lake Michigan water levels resulted in water shortages throughout the city. Ironically enough, the city of Appleton contacted Manitowoc to see if they could obtain Lake Michigan water through Manitowoc. So the fact that Appleton thought Lake Michigan was a viable source for drinking water spurred renewed interest in Manitowoc to consider Lake Michigan as their drinking water source. Ultimately, in 1969, Manitowoc Public Utilities constructed the first water treatment plant for the city of Manitowoc. Let me take a moment and talk about these rainy collector wells that was used as groundwater wells for the city of Manitowoc until the 1960s. The city of Manitowoc installed three wells on Lake Michigan. These rainy collector wells were a unique well that are much different than a well you might find on a farm or a country residence. These wells are a large concrete caisson or concrete shaft that's drilled down into the earth, about 80 to 100 feet deep. At the bottom of the shaft are some laterals that radiate out from the bottom to collect groundwater, hence the name the rainy collector. The pumps in the pump house would pump this filtered groundwater throughout into the distribution system. Manitowoc had three wells, Collector A to the north, Collector B was at Silver Creek Park, and Collector C is south near County Highway LS. If you've watched Silver Creek Park prior to the year 2000, you may have seen this collector well on the shoreline of Lake Michigan. This was Collector B, and it was demolished in the year 2000. So groundwater is filtered through Mother Earth. Rainwater falls onto the surface of the earth, passes through many layers of sand and gravel, and collects in underground aquifers. And that's where that water now is protected from the influence of animals or debris. So it's a very safe water, but it's also collecting minerals as it passes through those layers of sand and gravel. An alternative to groundwater is surface water treatment. Just like water passes through the earth to be filtered through many layers of sand and gravel, a surface water treatment plant is constructed using concrete tanks and many layers of sand and gravel. The lake water is then passed through these many layers to be filtered out. And Manitowoc successfully used surface water treatment from 1970 through 1999. The reason we switched from surface water treatment to our newest technology is due to the cryptosporidium outbreak in Milwaukee in 1994. The cryptosporidium bug exists in Lake Michigan water, and it was thought that the cryptosporidium pathogen could not pass through these layers of sand and gravel. But it did in 1994 in Milwaukee, and it caused a large outbreak, and several hundred people died from consuming city water in Milwaukee in 1994. So in 1999, Manitowoc Public Utilities installed our first continuous microfiltration plant, shown here in this picture. Water is pressurized through membranes to be filtered. In 2006, we installed our second microfiltration plant, a submerged microfiltration plant shown here. Our microfiltration plants now today can treat up to 20 million gallons per day. The city of Manitowoc consumes just over 6 million gallons per day, and we also sell nearly 7 million gallons per day to the Central Brown County Water Authority, which I'll explain. Manitowoc Public Utilities has multiple intakes into Lake Michigan to obtain Lake Michigan water. We use Lake Michigan water for drinking water through our water treatment plant, but we also use even more water to pass through the power plant for non-contact cooling water in the condensers. Water is screened at the lake intake, and it's also screened at the raw water pump station. We want to remove any kind of debris or logs and fish from getting into our equipment. MPU is permitted to withdraw up to 208 million gallons per day from the Great Lakes. This picture shows our 4 intakes. The longest intake is raw water pump station 1 on the far right, and that's nearly 2 miles offshore. Raw water pump station 2 is in the middle. That's just about 1 mile offshore. And then the 2 short intakes bring lake water into the power plant. And those are the 2 cribs, concrete cribs you can see offshore by the power plant by Lincoln High School. Those are our 2 intakes for the power plant. The traveling water screen we have on shore, as I described earlier, screens the water to make sure any debris or algae or fish do not get into our water system. So I've talked about our microfiltration plants. So let's talk more about the membranes that consist of the microfiltration plant. The membranes we use are an absolute physical barrier to reject anything larger than the pore size of the membrane, which is 0.2 microns, or 300 times smaller than a human hair. These pores can now block out pathogens in the lake like cryptosporidium or giardia, these harmful pathogens that we don't want to be consuming. Membranes also allow us to build the plant in a modular fashion. We can build as many membrane skids as we need to treat the water and expand later as our demands grow. All water utilities are regulated on the treated water turbidity, the nephelometric turbidity unit. Here's a display of a variety of turbidities, with the cleanest water being on the left and some dirty water on the right. Lake Michigan, you can go to Lake Michigan and scoop out a glass of water and it may look clear to you, but it will have turbidity in the water and there could be pathogens in the water. Turbidity, or the cloudiness of the water, is not harmful, but bacteria can attach itself to dirt in the water as a vehicle to get into the body and go through your system. So if you can clean the water where there's no bacteria or any particles for the bacteria to attach to, you've treated the water. The display on the right is an example of a pressurized microfiltration module, where lake water is passed through a module of about 4 inches diameter. That module consists of about 10,000 microfiltration fibers. Here's a blown up microscopic view of one of those single fibers. The porous wall of the fiber does the filtration. So the lake water would be on the outside of this tube, and it would pass through the fiber, through these pore sizes, to be filtered. Another example, here's a better example showing that single fiber where water can pass through the pores in the fiber and bacteria or dirt is rejected because they are bigger than the pore size of the fiber. So water can pass through, and that's how we do the filtering. After the water is filtered through the microfiltration fibers, there may be some viruses still in the water. We cannot filter out viruses. So we need to disinfect the water, and it's common to use chlorine bleach or chlorine to inactivate or disinfect the viruses that still exist in the water. This would be an example of one of our large pump stations and reservoirs where we allow the water to be in contact with the chlorine. After several hours of the water being in contact with the chlorine, we pump it out into our distribution system. We continually monitor the level of chlorine in the water to make sure that it's safe to drink and it's safe all the way throughout the distribution system. Pumping of the water out into the distribution system goes through 195 miles of water mains. There's a water main under every city street in the city of Manitowoc, serving our nearly 15,000 customers. Water mains are buried 6 feet deep, only due to the depth of the frost that can occur in the winter. We want to be below the frozen ground so that our pipes don't freeze in the winter. We also install valves at every intersection so that we can isolate segments of the main for maintenance or repairs. There are over 2,800 valves in the city of Manitowoc. We also have 1,400 hydrants throughout the city, and those are located nearly on every block to make sure that every house has adequate fire protection. We have 3 water towers in the city of Manitowoc. Water towers are simply a way to ensure that we have water pressure even if there's a power outage in the city. Here we're looking at the Reed Avenue water tower or the Piggly Wiggly tower. There's 1.5 million gallons in this water tower. Here's the water tower near Menards that was constructed in the 1990s and raised in the year 2003. And that tower can hold 1.5 million gallons of water as well. And the water tower by Horsey Habit or the Manitowoc composting site, another 1.5 million gallons can be elevated in that water tower. Not only do we have elevated storage, but we have 5 million gallons of water in an underground tank that can be pumped to residents. You might be surprised to learn that Citizens Park is a concrete reservoir. So when you're playing tennis or basketball on Citizens Park, you're standing over 5 million gallons of safe drinking water. Not only do we sell water to the city of Manitowoc, but in 2004, we signed an agreement to sell water to the suburbs of Green Bay. This would be the Central Brown County Water Authority, which consists of 7 communities, including Alloway, Bellevue, De Pere, Howard, Lawrence, Ledgeview, and Denmark. These communities were once groundwater systems, but in the late 1990s and early 2000s, they learned that the new rules for drinking water would not allow them to use their groundwater wells. So they were looking for a new water source. And after negotiating with the city of Green Bay and negotiating with Manitowoc Public Utilities, they agreed to buy water from us in the year 2004. The Water Authority contributed $26 million for us to expand our water treatment plant to serve them. And the Water Authority installed and owns the $110 million pipeline that goes between Manitowoc and the Green Bay area. Our staff operates and maintains that pipeline for the Water Authority. And the Water Authority purchases 57% of the volume we produce every day. I want to thank you for letting me share our water story with you. If you have any questions, you can contact the MPU Water Department at www.mpu.org.